Sophie.
Hi, Sin.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another exciting Souls Mixtape episode where we take your question and answer them objectively.
Yes, this has been fact-checked by true Lordran patriots.
Now, Sophie.
Yes.
Question 1.
We haven't talked about who's asked the questions and where they ask them.
Oh, yes. So, you
This
may
could be from anyone. We need context.
So basically, anyone can ask questions. The way you do it is you leave a comment below, or you go on patreon.com/SinclairLore and you leave a question there, and then we read them out and answer them.
Yeah, and if you're a patron, we'll try to get to your questions first. There is a specific patron who left like 6 questions at once, and I just want to be clear, we haven't skipped you. We're just going to answer all your questions at once in a separate episode.
Yeah. Mega patron.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, the first question is from Kimmy.
Mm-hmm.
What is the Great Swamp?
Well, Sin, you played Dark Souls?
Let me Google this real quick. Great Swamp.
I'm leaving that in.
Great Swamp.
It's like a key part of like the one game that you like seriously played that wasn't Bloodborne.
Great Swamp Pyromancy Tome. Okay.
That's part of it.
Okay. Give spells of the. So the Great Swamp is pretty important.
Yep.
It's been a few years. We've talked about this before. It's been a few years since I played Dark Souls,
yeah,
and my
same.
memory is not as good as Sophie's. Yeah, I'll look at. You know what? Wait, Great Swamp, Dark Souls. I'll look at the pictures. I will remember.
Not actually in any of the games. You just hear about it.
Okay. Somebody on ArtStation.com made a Great Swamp. It's beautiful.
Good.
Yeah, I remember it. It's amazing.
Yeah.
I have no memory of what the Great Swamp is, Sophie.
Okay. So the Great Swamp is not somewhere that you ever actually go in the Dark Souls games. You just hear about it. It's like Thoroland or Kareem or something. It's like, this is a place that you hear about and it's important, but you don't go there. You go to a lot of other swamps, but not the Great Swamp.
So what is it?
Well, if it's a Great Swamp, right, do you think it's great because it's really big, or it's great because it's just really good? Like, is it a swamp the size of a city, or do you just look at it and you're like, God, that's a good swamp?
Oh, that's an amazing swamp. Maybe it has like a little attraction park.
Maybe that's the reason Miyazaki never put in any of the games, because he's like, technology has not advanced to the point where we can render a swamp to my satisfaction. All right, so the Great Swamp.
Yeah.
The Great Swamp is actually like surprisingly consistently described across the 3 games.
Okay.
Yep, and it's the place where the pyromancers come from.
Huh.
But the thing about it is, like, you might think, isn't that Izalith, right?
Right.
Thankfully, the game's actually quite clear about, like, how this all works, which is that the Witch of Izalith creates the Chaos Flame. It goes out of control.
Mm-hmm.
This leads to the creation of pyromancy, but it also effectively destroys Izalith.
Okay.
Quelana is like the one surviving daughter of Chaos who doesn't sort of go mad. Like, it's weird because there's apparently another daughter of Chaos in Izalith who just looks like Quelana, but she talks about herself like she's the last survivor, essentially. She leaves Izalith and she goes to the Great Swamp.
Okay.
So from this we can deduce you can presumably travel from Izalith to the Great Swamp on foot. That's really the only indication we have of where it is. Also, like, Quelana's potentially like thousands of years old, so she could have traveled halfway around the world. It's not clear where it is. When she's there, she meets a human called Salaman, and she teaches what she knows from Izalith to Salaman. And then Salaman passes his knowledge from her down to someone else called Carmina. And then that's passed down to the pyromancers of the swamp. So there's this line that sort of goes like Witch of Izalith, Quelana, Salaman, Carmina, and then like, you know, Aingi, Laurentius, Cuculus, Cornix, etc.
Did you just make all of this up? I have no memory of any of this. I know Izalith and Quelana.
I think the issue is that you don't play magic builds.
Oh, you know what?
Yeah.
I actually hate magic, so maybe that's the issue.
Yeah, that's probably the problem here. Yeah. We learn about like what the Great Swamp is kind of like. Also, we don't just learn like, you know, where it is and what happened there. So, they do an interesting thing between Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 3, right? Where in Dark Souls 1, you meet Laurentius of the Great Swamp.
Right. I remember him.
He's wearing this very specific pyromancer set. I think it's just called the Tattered Cloth set in Dark Souls 1.
Okay.
When you get to Dark Souls 3, the default pyromancer set is actually this completely different thing that's like very sort of shamanic looking. It's got this big bronze disc over the chest. It's got these feathers that looks like crow feathers. And it makes a point in 3 of like, yeah, the pyromancers, because they were trying to get in touch with nature, they would like adorn themselves in like feathers and things like that. And that actually lines up with something that Laurentius says in Dark Souls 1, where he's like, he basically says what I just said. It is, if you want to be a pyromancer, you got to get in touch with nature. And the reason that the pyromancers like swamps is that swamps are like, you know, this very sort of natural place. There's all these like trees and animals and like life in the swamp.
It's like a nature smoothie.
Yes, that's exactly what a swamp is. A swamp is a nature smoothie. So the thing Dark Souls 3 does there is it also includes the set that Laurentius is wearing. But it doesn't call it the Pyromancer set, it calls it the Conjurator set. And it says that the Conjurators were like the predecessors of the Pyromancers.
Okay.
And it also specifies that like the people of the Great Swamp, they're there because they're viewed as heretical. Because like pyromancy is viewed as like, you're not supposed to be touching this. This is like bad magic. You're not supposed to do it. This sort of ties back to like, we've talked about this a little bit, but like the Japanese word that becomes pyromancy, it's nothing to do with fire. The word that they use for it in Japanese, basically, it's weird because hex would have been a good translation, but they use hex in 3 to mean something completely different. But like it basically means it's jujutsu. It means like witchcraft. Like it's to sort of it's to differentiate like magic in Dark Souls, as in like sorcery. That's something that like you go to an academy and you study it, and it's very sort of like methodical, and you've learned this thing from a book. So the magic in Dark Souls that we call it sorcery, right? So the whole point of like sorcery is like it's something that is like it's studied. Like you go to a school and you learn, and then the knowledge you acquire allows you to manipulate sorcery. It's sort of like methodical, it's academic, it's research based. It's like you're peering into like, you know, how does this weird magic force work? And now that I understand that, I can start harnessing it, but I'm harnessing it in this very kind of intellectual way. Pyromancy / jujutsu is more like it's like sort of it's kind of intuitive magic. Like you just kind of get in touch with nature, and like you kind of like, you know, you start to learn to manipulate like fire and mist, and you're starting to learn to like manipulate like, oh, we all have a little bit of fire in us now. I can actually pull that fire out and start moving it, and you can start manipulating like nature and things. You can start manipulating the core, like you can start manipulating like what your body is made of and like how your body is functioning and things like that. So that's kind of what they're getting at with like Cornix and his obsession with like ravens and feathers and bronze and things, where it's like, you know, I'm casting a spell and I'm using like, you know, the entrails of a bird and some feathers and things, as opposed to I studied how to do this. It's like he's just sort of feeling his way through it. Okay. So like, and that's sort of like it's descending from the idea of like the Witch of Izalith, like she's a witch. So
Okay.
that seems to be why, like, they're viewed as heretical. Like, you're going somewhere that's dangerous and you're not supposed to be there.
Mm-hmm.
So you get the impression that, like, it's not necessarily that the Great Swamp is, like, the place where, like, there happened to be, like, tribes or societies of pyromancers who, like, learned to manipulate flame, like, as a cultural thing. It's more like all the people who started to play with this pyromancy / jujutsu, they were ostracized. They were made heretics. And consequently, they just ended up in the Great Swamp because it was distinct from the rest of the world. They could just basically hide out there. But also because it was somewhere that, like we said, it was so full of life and nature and things that it was advantageous to be there. Like, you would become a better pyromancer from being there. So,
thank you, Sophie. That was a brilliant answer.
the best part is I literally could have made all of that up. One day I'm going to.
Could have. I'll just smile and nod and be like, that is wonderful.
Next time we do one of these, I'm going to include a fake question because I don't want someone's sincere question answered sarcastically. I'm going to include a fake question. I'm going to give you a fake answer, and you have to fucking guess which one it was.
Now, the second question is from Fa. What did Vendrick steal from the Giants, and why did he need anything in the first place? Oh, Jesus, that's Dark Souls 2. That's embarrassing that I don't remember Dark Souls 2 despite doing a Mary Kondo run.
You didn't finish it, though. Did you give up at, like, No Man's Wharf? Like,
no, girl, No Man Wharf is clear. No, I kept going. I'm at the windmills, at the mills that you gotta burn or something.
Yeah, okay, so
I'm cleaning that area out.
Way through the game.
Yeah, it's a little tough. You know, I'll be. We're on episode like 200 of cleaning out Dark Souls 2.
Okay.
But yeah, didn't he want? Because Vendrick is all about experimenting, right? And the soul and.
Well, he's interested in, like, the nature of the soul, but the experiments are Aldia's thing.
Yeah, but aren't they still together?
Yeah, they are.
Are they living in the same castle? Yeah. So he can't be like, I had no idea. I had no idea Aldia was doing all this freaky stuff. I had no idea these cages with people in them were just decor. I thought he was just avant-garde. So
I had no idea this was going on. Vendrick, where do you want us to put the dead giant? He's confusing me with another Vendrick.
So I'm going to say he was kidnapping giant children, and stealing people's souls and stealing actual giants. It was like probably a mass kidnapping because he needed to experiment on them all.
We did do you remember we did a whole episode on this?
No.
Well, where did this information come from? Because you're not actually in that part of the game yet. So this is clearly like a repressed memory of when we did an episode about this exact topic.
I think so.
Okay, good. Okay. So, the thing that happened, like, when Dark Souls, this is what the question's referring to, is, like, it mentions Vendrick stole, Dark Souls 2 mentions, Vendrick stole something important from the Giants and took it back to Drunglake. And that's why the Giants then arrive and attack Drunglake, because they want to get that thing back. But the script never specifies what the thing actually was, which led to this theory, like, oh, it's like some great treasure of the Giants, or like, is it the, you get a thing called the Giants' kinship, so like, is it the kinship of the Giants? Like, what did Vendrick steal? And it turned out that, like, it's a translation thing, and it's like, what Vendrick stole, like, was the Giants. Like you were saying, like, he went to where the Giants were, it's never actually specified where the Giants come from, they're just from across the sea. Vendrick goes across the sea, and he takes, like, the Giants captive and takes them back to Drunglake. So when the Giants attack Drunglake, it's like, partially revenge and also partially like a rescue mission to try to get like the giants that they've kidnapped back again. And yeah, like again, like you said, because we covered this in the episode, it seems to be related to like his experiments, because you'll notice like the giants in Dark Souls 2, this is later retconned in Dark Souls 3, but it didn't exist at the time, so we'll forget about it for now. They have like a hole for a face.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like that, and also like the basic like size of them and like the shape of them and everything. It ends up looking a lot like the golems that Vendrick ends up building. Okay. And that's literally like alluded to in the script. They're like, you know, Vendrick went across the sea and fought the giants and he returned, and then the golems came into being. So like it's never directly like there's no item that says and then Vendrick made the golems out of giants, but like everything is sort of pointing toward like Vendrick kidnapped the giants because there was something about them that he was curious about, like something about their relationship to the soul. And that's why, like, in Aldia's Keep, you find, like, there's a room where they've literally, like, there's just a bunch of dead giants, and there's someone...
Oh, that's right. There's someone guarding them or something.
No, it's someone with a cleaver, and they're, like, hacking up a bit of giants. It's very, like, Bergenworth.
Yeah. Oh.
So it's, like, there's something about the giants, like, the giants have a different relationship with soul that humans do. And then what happens is like he kidnaps the giants, then he creates these big golem creatures. And if you'll remember, like when you fight those golem things, they have a system where like if you kill something in front of them, the soul actually goes into the golem and you don't get it.
Yeah.
And it activates the golems. So he starts constructing these, like, this is just a body, but it can house soul. And in a sense, that's kind of what Vendrick ends up as, because, like, he loses his soul and he loses his humanity and he just ends up as, like, a corpse. And you sort of get the impression that, like, maybe that, like, he's trying to figure out, like, can I separate? Because Demon Souls is very explicit about it, that, like, the soul is, like... the seat of reason. It's like what gives humans the ability to like think and like reason and plan and like empathize and things like that. It's like your function. It's like your sort of high cognitive functions as a human being. And that's why like, you know, when you lose your soul and you become hollow, or in Demon Souls you become soul starved, like the end result is like you revert to this like sort of base state where like you no longer have like human reason, you no longer have like your cognitive faculties, you're just like screaming and like you're behaving, you know, like you're behaving very sort of animalistically. Like you become like a zombie, like it's like you've lost everything that made you a person. That's sort of what the soul is. So like Vendrick is possibly his weird like hollowed undead like staggering state is actually the result of him deliberately like removing what made him from his flesh, and like it's a deliberate form of separation that seems to have come out of like what the golems are, because the golem is like this is like a vessel for a soul, and we're like kind of figuring out the difference between like where does the soul end and where does the vessel begin kind of stuff.
Okay. Thank you, Sophie. That was also a beautiful answer. Okay, so question number 3. By Sunny Celestial. On the unused ceremony system in Dark Souls 3, Lance McDonald said there was a very interesting aspect that he would elaborate on in a follow-up video, but he never did. Any ideas on what it was?
Okay, so I don't know specifically what he's talking about. But like I do know from my regular sort of like correspondence with Eugenio, who some people might know as like Abyss One, who's like he's a modder and a data miner. And one of the things Eugenio's pointed out is that if you get like old maps, like as in not one of the things Eugenio has found out is that like in older versions of like map files that aren't in the game anymore, and also older screenshots, it actually looks like the light dark world system kind of functioned like a time travel mechanic as well. So like when you did the ceremony, instead of it just making the world dark like a new skybox thing and calling like the weird snake things into the sky, it would have effects on the physical structure of the level in a similar way to like if people remember some of the white black world tendency things from Demon's Souls, like those weren't just enemy things. Those would be like, oh, a door is open now that didn't used to be open. Or like there's a bridge in Latria that's like suddenly it's appeared it wasn't there before. Or like there's a ladder you can access in Valley of Defilement that you can't normally. Like it would have those kind of physical effects. And it looks like it was more in depth than that. So like the example that he was showing me is like, if you look at the way that High Wall of Lothric is presented in this like light world thing, and then you look at it in this dark world thing, you can see the Grand Archives in the distance and like the bridge that connects Lothric Castle to the Grand Archives. And they actually are structured differently. It's like the bridge has moved and like a new building has been constructed. So it's almost like you're flipping between two different versions of Lothric Castle. And we sort of extrapolated from that like, oh god, there's a bunch of map files in Dark Souls 3 that have weird names. Like it's one that's called like Anor Londo brackets of the past. And it's like, what past? But now we're wondering if like, oh, is this what it was? Was it like when you swapped between worlds, you were actually going to like alt versions of an area? We actually mentioned this when we talked about Untended Graves last time, but like the theory that like I'm sort of running with is like Untended Graves is the way it is because that's a remnant of this like idea they had where you would be able to swap between light and dark versions of levels. And Untended Graves might be like the sort of the residue of that system that didn't make it into the game, where like it's the same map kind of as Cemetery of Ash, but it's radically quite different. Like it's not just like this is Cemetery of Ash, but it's night. It's like this is Cemetery of Ash, but the NPCs are different. The boss is different. The like enemy positions are totally different, and you can sort of extrapolate from that. You know, maybe they wanted more. Did they want like, you know, getting light and dark world tendency and making them into like actually these are two kind of totally separate levels now? It looks like it's one of those things that like it was roughly sort of like sketched out as something they might try to do, and it didn't come to fruition. So there's not like, it's not something that you can like flick some bytes somewhere and it comes back. Like I don't think it was ever working, but I have no idea if that's what Lance is referring to. But that's what struck me when I saw that, because I have talked to Eugenio about that.
Okay. Thank you, Sophie. Question number 4 is by Dova Brewer. I, for one, would know, I think they mean would love to know, what the heck was going on with the time travel stuff / illusion stuff in the Ringed City. I still sometimes think about Anor Londo and Lothric in the background of the Gale Arena. Gives me conniptions.
Yeah. You of course know what we're talking about, don't you?
Okay, this one I know. It's when we touch the egg, right?
Yeah.
It's when we... Like, okay, that's also something that I wonder about, because I think when I don't know, I first played it, whatever, at some point I had thoughts being like, oh, so when you touch the egg, it's a metaphor. It reveals that everything here is like an illusion. It's just they're trying to keep appearances. They're like, we're all good here. Don't worry about us. The Ringed City is fine. Everything's working as intended. And, once you break the illusion, it's like actually everything's in chaos.
Yeah.
And the pygmies are actually dead.
Yeah.
But also I don't know where I heard this. It's like there are the theories that it's like, no, when you touch the egg, you move forward in time.
Yeah.
And what it shows you is that in the future, everything's collapsed anyway.
Yeah.
And Gale is eating the pygmies.
Yeah.
So what do you think?
I think the first thing to mention is, like, it's very, very reminiscent of the Guinevere illusion in Anor Londo. Where, like, Anor Londo appears all sunny and nice, and then once the Guinevere illusion is dispelled, like, it's not just that it goes dark, it's, like, actually the place changes. Like, the enemies will change, they'll actually despawn, and you'll get this, like, sort of almost empty version of Anor Londo. And that's, like, it's tied to, like, one of Gwyn's daughters. So it's like, oh, here's another one of Gwyn's daughters. And if you interfere with her, the same thing kind of happens. Yeah. So I think, like, the question of whether it's all, like, fake and then it falls down, or whether you go forward in time is really kind of confusing to answer, because, like, when Filianor awakens from having the egg touched, like, she immediately becomes this withered corpse, and, like, that could represent, like, time has just accelerated, and, like, she's actually, like, now she's been dead for, like, 100 years or whatever. But it could also be she was dead all along and this was an illusion. I think it's pretty clear she is alive, though. Like, because she reacts with horror when the egg is touched.
Wakes up, or
she's like,
yeah.
like that.
Yeah. What did you do? Yeah.
They seem to be aware that that's going to happen, because, like, the pygmy that you meet at the start, like, he mentions to you, like, this whole thing, like, firstly, the ring city itself is kind of an illusion. Like, someone will dispel it one day. And there's other ones that's like, do not disturb the princess's slumber. So they kind of know that's going to happen. Yeah. But, like, when they talk about, like, oh, it's an illusion, like, it's all a charade, it's, again, not 100% clear there. Do they mean literally it is an illusion? Or, like, they're saying it shouldn't be. Like, it shouldn't really be here. It's a charade that, like, everything's okay, everything's not okay, and breaking Filianor's egg reveals that, like, kind of breaking Filianor's egg is what, like, brings the Ring City in line with the rest of the world, sort of thing. Like, it's really sort of, like, unclear exactly what they're getting at, but I think either of them kind of work out. And, the Lothric and Anor Londo in the background is, like, one of the more baffling things in the Ring City, which is itself a deeply baffling work. Like, Anor Londo in the background is, you can kind of go, like, okay, I guess this is so far in the future that Anor Londo's in the distance in a desert. The weird thing about Lothric being there is that in order to get to the Ring City, you have to go through, like, ruined bits of Lothric. Parts of the Dreg Heap area that you have to go through to get to the Ring City itself is made up of Lothric Castle.
Oh, everything's, like, weird.
Like, it's... Yeah. So you literally, like, you go through bits of, like, the old Lothric archives, you go through bits of, like, the Lothric streets, you meet Lothric knights there. So Lothric Castle's ruins and Earthen Peak's ruins and God knows what else are all being compressed into this big mass of ash, right? However, once you leave that and go to the Ring City itself, Lothric Castle appears to be intact in the distance. And that's post the illusion breaking down. So it's not like you can say it's an illusory Lothric Castle.
I actually, like, with time, really liked the Ring City DLC. And one of the things that I liked about it is that when you go through the DLC, right, you have things like kind of like melting together. You have the angels shooting lasers at you. You have a lot of enemies. You have confused patches. You have bright colors. You have like beautiful scenery, but also like you got to defend just a lot of things going on. Even all the way to when you meet Filianor, there's like you still got to fight an enemy or two. You still got to do this, got to do that. Go fast. And once you touch the egg, it's like silence. Yeah. It's like you're in this other place. It's finally quiet. It's all over. It's almost like this sense of relief, right? Yeah. But it was also like when you go in the arena, it's like a little bit of despair. Like, okay, what is happening now? What is going on? Everything's ruined. Everything's covered in sand. Gale is eating a pygmy. What are we doing? What is the point of this? Yeah, I really like that. Yeah. I was kind of hoping that we can't go back to the game anymore. I was hoping like that's it.
I feel like if it was Dark Souls 1, you wouldn't have been able to go back.
Yeah.
Because Dark Souls 3 is like, it feels like it's a little worried you might miss something. Like that's sort of one of the issues I have with it is like it's determined to show you everything and kind of try to make sure you don't get locked out of stuff. Although weirdly, it's easy to alienate Cirrus without trying. But yeah, it's sort of like that. Whereas if you compare that to like Dark Souls 1, where like about a third of the game is totally optional and they don't even really show you that it's there. Like you just sort of encounter it. Like Ash Lake is the obvious example. Where like there's this whole like underworld area that is totally optional. There's no boss. The treasure there isn't even that good. It's a shitty Dragon Covenant. Yeah. But like it's just like this is just a place that exists. And doesn't matter if you go there or not because you don't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas Dark Souls 3 is like, I'm going to show you everything except Untended Graves and Archdragon Peak, which I'm going to hide behind like honestly fairly counterintuitive ways of getting there.
Yeah, that was a little, okay, I see. But I was also hoping, I guess, kind of like, you know, like Gale is eating the pygmy and he's like, oh, I'm must paint. Oh, my lady needs paint, whatever. But it's like, if you think about it, like Gale, she's dead. Like everything is gone. Like you didn't do it on time. You didn't do it the right way. Like the painting world, whatever. It was already, was it on fire? It was rotten. It was on fire. It's done.
There's a slight problem with this.
Yeah.
Which is that when you beat Gale, you can just get the paint and you can take it to the lady. And she's like, thanks for the paint. So presumably he could have done that as well.
I wish you couldn't. But that's the thing. I wish it was just like, nah, like you failed, like you're trying, but it's all over. We all failed. Humanity or whatever should try better next time.
So your idea is like you go to the Ringed City and then that happens and it's just an ash desert and you kill Gale, but then there's just nothing.
There's just nothing.
There's just
like,
nothing,
it was all,
and
like...
your character is and it's just like the camera just pulls back, and your character is just like totally alone, and they just like sink into the sand, and that's the end of the series.
That's the end. Yeah, yes, okay. That's that. Yeah.
No, I'm cool with that.
And then the post-credit scene is like that one night walking in the desert, like, hello, did someone touch the egg? Thank you, Sophie. Question number 5 is by Elliot Van Tonder. I'd love to hear what Sophie thinks about the inclusion of gender-ambiguous characters in so many of From Software games. Example, Gwendolyn, Gender Coffin, Kuro X Divine Child, Michaela, Marika/Radagon, AH, C4, 621, etc. Do you think that anyone at FromSoft, parentheses Miyazaki, has something to say about gender?
Well, as we've been informed reliably, that's all a reference to alchemy and we need to stop being reductive.
It's true, we have been informed of that.
Yeah. And also that none of this is ambiguous and it's all canon. It's interesting that people go on and on about how like, yeah, it's like you don't get the full story. You have to like come up with your own interpretation. And then you're like, this character seems gay and like he's definitely not.
No. That's the one wrong interpretation. Yeah.
So I think like Miyazaki clearly is very invested in that. He's also very, very invested in parent-child relationships.
Yeah.
Because like we talk a lot about like his weird obsession with killing babies in video games,
Yeah.
which I think reaches its apotheosis in Derasane, where he figures out by using a time loop he can have children murdered over and over again by a character who is themselves a murdered child. But that obsession that he's got, like, it's not just that he's like thinks dead children are like a shocking thing to include for the sake of it. Like, they're always contextualized as like there's some reason why, like the dead children always represent something significant about the society that's like producing them.
Like demon souls.
Yeah.
That baby swamp.
Well, yeah. Like Bloodborne especially, like, where it's all about, like...
Yeah.
Everything's dying because, like, they don't sort of want to... Like, it's all about, like, this sort of, like, parental longing that can't be filled but also can't be understood. So there's this, like, treatment of children as, like, something that these things are reaching out for and trying to grab, but also being treated as, like, a resource by people who don't have that relationship to them. And it's, like, the interplay of those two things.
Yeah.
So, like, I think Miyazaki's clearly, like, focused on that stuff. Gwendolyn's another, like, really obvious one. Like, if we step back a little bit, like, the way that the Gwendolyn character's created is interesting because we know from, like, interviews that, like, there was not a plan to have this, like, Gwendolyn character from the start. Like, it was a design. Like, Miyazaki started with this design of this character who originally represented something totally different, and then Gwendolyn was built on top of that. And the way that they do that is, like... sorry.
Beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, and, like, the Gwendolyn character, like, that design, it starts off like there's not a gender ambiguous thing going on. It's like this is a, like, woman, and they call her, like, the Moon Priestess, and they specify that, like, she's a woman, and the snakes coming out of the bottom of the skirt are meant to, like, suggest menstruation. It's meant to be like this fluid, these, like, streaks are coming out the bottom of the skirt, similar to what they do with Astraea in Demon Souls. Like, Astraea's sitting there and there's the red swamp. And then there's, like, the babies in the red swamp, and the redness of the swamp is creeping up her white dress. So it's almost like she's sitting in this massive pool of, like, afterbirth, and there's all these of, like, afterbirth and menstruation, and there's all these, like, stillborn infants crawling around in there, kind of showing, like, Astraea has this weird relationship to, like, motherhood. And again, like, the babies in Demon Souls, they're clearly, like, the design is clearly taken from the demon child from Berserk.
Yeah.
But it's like with Gwendolyn, it's like we have this design, but then we're going to riff on it and take it in a different direction. So, like, I think Bloodborne is the best example of all of this, where, like, Miyazaki's clearly got, like, very strong feelings. These things clearly resonate with him because it's like this thing was rewritten and rewritten and rewritten and rewritten up till literally, like, a couple of months before it came out. But what those rewrites do is, like, every time they do that, yes, the mechanics of the plot get increasingly muddled to the point where we're not 100% sure, like, how many red moons there are supposed to have been anymore, or, like, exactly where, like, Lauren and Ys are in relationship to Yharnam, where the Chalice Dungeons are itself gets a little muddled. The timeline like how long it's been is never really explained. But what happens is what those rewrites are doing is it almost becomes like a stream of consciousness where suddenly all of these things that were there, like the Queen Yarnum character, like she gets sort of promoted to being this very, very integral part of the plot, but like she's not originally. Like they do not start Bloodborne, because I've looked at so many older versions of this. They don't start Bloodborne with the idea of like Queen Yarnum. They start with like Lucy from the 1992 Dracula, like that design. Like they look at like that. Literally, Queen Yarnum is just Lucy from Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula. They just copy her completely, and like latching on to like, oh yeah, there's this like woman in a wedding dress with this like blood around her, and then they start building on that and building on that until Queen Yarnum becomes like such an integral part of the story. The relationship with Murgo becomes this integral part of the story. Like they're just running on instinct. Like these are the important things we need to do. We need to have more of this and more of this and more of this, and we need to have like the image of Kos being cut open when viewed from some angles. Like she looks like she is in a wedding dress. Like she had this like white figure with this like billowing stomach going out like that, and it's like what they're doing is all of those ideas and those motifs and those symbols and everything, they're already like present. Over time, they start bringing it out more and more and more and making it more central. And the same thing is true of like Gwendolyn. Like this is the third time that like we've talked about Gwendolyn, I think, on this, but like, we've talked about Gwendolyn actually fits perfectly into that idea of like the binary nature of like the world falling to pieces. Because like there's no statues of Gwendolyn in Anno Londo. Like it's fairly clear that like when they were designing Gwyn's family, it was just like Gwyn, Guinevere, Nameless King.
Yeah.
But then they sort of like, it's like they latch onto that idea of, oh, they should be like a child that embodies like the shifting of the world. And that ends up working because like, well, of course they don't have statues because we're not acknowledging them. And like, of course they have this like weird gender ambiguous presentation where like we will sometimes refer to in terms of like it's a performance, but sometimes it's referred to as a choice they're making, but sometimes it's referred to like an essence.
Yeah.
And that's all in there. And like it's constant throughout the series, because the series is always playing with those ideas. But like what I think like the strength of the way Miyazaki does storytelling is that like he doesn't think he knows what other people are thinking, if that makes sense. Like his characters, when you meet them, they have characterizations and they have like obvious observable traits, and like they want things, and it's clear like they have the following, like these are their desires and these are their flaws or everything, but you don't get much of an internal voice. Like you hear, like you observe them and you hear about things that they've done, but it's like encountering someone in real life. Like you met this person a few times, you have a rough idea of who they are, you sort of know what's happened to them, but you're not getting like, actually here's their entire psyche, here's everything they've ever thought, here's everything they ever felt. Like they don't get that. And the same thing is true of like the worlds of the games, which like it's one of the things that gets to me where like, to me, the storytelling of the Souls games, the way that it's like got that vague, ambiguous quality to it, where you're finding scraps of information, like that's not, we didn't finish the story. It's just like this world that exists does not exist for your benefit. And you can't know it in the same way that you can't know like the world that you live in now. Like we can't ever fully understand what another person is like. We can't ever fully know everything about the world that we live in. That doesn't mean it doesn't make sense or it's random or it's unfinished. And going back to like all the gender and childbirth and motherhood stuff, like he's clearly obsessed with it, but he doesn't actually come down and say like maternal longing is like this, you know, that like I feel like his work is always like that. It's like taking a step back and just allowing those ideas to sort of like be explored but not come down on like, you know, an attempted like answer. Like you don't get a lecture about it. You don't get like, and here's what it all means. Like you never get that. You know, these creatures are longing for children. They can't have children. We know that. You know, these scientists are trying to understand like what these creatures are like. They themselves don't care about children, so there's a conflict there. But at no point in that does it actually come down and you get a lecture on like what it's actually like to lose a child. Like they don't ever say that.
Mm-hmm.
Having issues with like pregnancy and menstruation, being freaked out by them, it's like this. Like it doesn't tell you straight up like this is what it's like internally. This is what those people are feeling. It just shows you like that's how they're acting.
I was actually thinking about like what you're saying, some of the horror movies when you watch them, and you know, you see something, you see like an image or something happening, and nobody tells you this means this means that, this is a metaphor for this. Like you kind of feel it, like, and it kind of stays with you.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's what Bloodborne is like. You may not understand what's happening, or you may not necessarily know what each metaphor represents, but you kind of feel it when you play the game. Feel those things.
Yeah, I think like the whole thing about metaphors is like if it was just about making a specific statement, there would be no need to invoke any kind of metaphors. Like you would just say it.
Mm-hmm.
Could just write that down. Just write a book. Like, but the whole point of like getting metaphorical, and like this is why I think Bloodborne's the best one, because it's more overtly horror, is like it allows you to get at the emotional core of that specifically. Like you're going for like the affect, you're going for like what it is that's actually like getting its claws into you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why like we were talking about like this is rule, it's actually about alchemy. Because like that was this thing that came up where it's like this attempt to sort of like shut down all of the discourse around like the stuff that's been brought up in the question about like the like sexuality and stuff in the From games by saying, no, it's all references to alchemy. So like Marika and Radagon, like instead of viewing that as like there's a bunch of like sexual gender things going on with Radagon and Marika, it becomes like, no, that's a reference to the alchemical rebus, which like if people know the rebus, it's this, you'd sort of know it if you look up alchemy stuff. It's this image of like a man and a woman kind of conjoined inside a like kind of burning crucible thing. And it's like, see, he's just referencing that. So when you talk about all this other stuff, you're ignoring the symbolic value of it. And it's like, that's such a fucking awful way of engaging with anything, because it's taking like these very potent, very like, you know, complex, emotional, psychological things and saying, no, they're actually a cipher. Mm-hmm. Like they're just like pointing at something. So it's like when you like an example of these, like the eye, like a woman. Well, when Miyazaki uses the eye, or he's referring to blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, he's not referring to one thing. He's referring to a whole lot of things, because I mean, he's not even consistent with how he does it. And it's like getting like all the reasons that stuff genuinely does interest people and genuinely does get at people, and saying that doesn't matter. It's like the equivalent of like a code breaker thing. Like you line it up, oh, the eye means this. Radagon and Marika being a male-female composite, it means this thing. And the thing that was like just so ridiculous about that is like, fucking alchemy is trans as hell. I brought it up in a Trina episode. One of the like big alchemical figures is I mean, these people don't exist, but whatever, was a real person called Falconelli. And there's this whole thing about like Falconelli was an old man. And then when Falconelli discovered like the secret of like the sort of transcendent truth of alchemy, Falconelli started looking more and more feminine, until Falconelli was this like kind of like implicitly sort of gender fluid figure that's like somewhere along the binary that's no longer male or female. And it's like, there's something really like potent about that as an idea, that to just go like, that's not trans, that's alchemy. It's like, but alchemy was trans to begin with.
Thank you, Sophie.
Now, Sin, I believe you have a question.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Yeah, I put aside a little slot here for Sin to ask a question, because Sin has a lot of questions for me.
Now, Sophie.
Yes, Sin.
After watching the Elden Ring DLC trailer, I thought, wow, this could actually be really interesting and something I should try.
Did you try it?
But after... No.
Hi, Sophie here. What followed this question were my feelings about Shadow of the Erdtree. The thing is that about 2 hours after this, I recorded another episode about my feelings on Shadow of the Erdtree with Saint Trina, and that one was much better, much more coherent, and made much more cogent points. Also, Trina had actually played it. Consequently, I've just cut this part out entirely, although if you are a patron, you did get an unedited version of this a few days ago, which Sin didn't tell me was happening. Anyway, back to the podcast, which is going to end in like 30 seconds.
Hey Google, be my podcast editor.
I don't know, but I found these results on search.
Oh, we're not there yet. Alright, well, thank you, Sophie.
Thank you, Sin. Thank you, Google.
Thank you, Google.
I don't know how to thank, but I found these suggestions.
No, you gotta thank your AI and stuff, because like when they take over, they'll remember that you were nice to them.
This is just Rocco's Basilisk, and we've had this discussion.
My pleasure.
And thank you everyone for listening.
Especially the AIs.
And especially the AI. Thank you, ChatGPT. Thank you, I don't know any other ones. Thank you, Skynet. Thank you, iRobot.
All Mind?
Thank you, All Might. Oh yeah, thank you, All Might.
Yeah. The Patriots from Metal Gear Solid 2.
And thank you everyone for listening. Until next time.
Bye.